Gaza? Who's to blame, and what lies ahead?
Well, before I tell you that, I can also confirm we've had some very, very poisonous demonstrations here in London today, including Israeli flags being burnt by so-called Palestinian supporters. But the reality of the situation in Israel and in Gaza is that a few days ago, the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the terrorist forces that control Gaza, launched an intense bombardment of rockets at Israeli civilian population. And they've so far, since the last 3 or 4 days, they've fired over 2,000 rockets at the Israeli civilians. Most of them, I'm happy to say, have been taken down by the Israelis' Iron Dome missile defense system. Some have got through, and unfortunately, some Israelis have been killed. Cities like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem itself, and other places throughout parts of Israel have been hit by these missiles. Meanwhile, of course, the IDF have been striking back very, very hard, and with precise strikes to take down the Hamas military infrastructure, doing their best, of course, to avoid killing innocent civilians. There have been many civilians killed in Gaza, but that's inevitable when you're dealing with a terrorist organization that hides behind human shields and makes that the central focus of its military strategy to try and get Israel to kill their own civilians. I think the reality right now, there's some consideration being given to peace negotiations mediated by the Egyptians, which could, I think, possibly produce some kind of result in the next day or so. But Israel has certainly done devastating damage to Hamas's military infrastructure without a shadow of doubt, including a really brilliant operation that occurred on Thursday evening in Gaza and destroyed kilometers of their tunnels.
Rita.
Well, tell us about that, because that was quite a strategic move where they tricked Hamas into reacting a certain way, and they used the media to achieve that. Take us through that.
It was an incredible operation. In my long and not so august military career, I don't think I've ever known of such an extraordinary surprise attack triggered by deception, a very, very deliberate deception operation. And effectively what the Israelis did is that they massed tanks, artillery and infantry on the border with Gaza and gave every indication they were going in. The tank engines were noisy, there was dust being picked up. The world media picked that up, and Hamas, of course, picked it up as well. And it was then thought there was going to be an immediate invasion of Gaza. And of course, hundreds of Hamas terrorists then went into this, what's called a metro tunnel network, an underground tunnel network they've dug since 2014, which contains weapons, contains command and control facilities and shelter for the terrorists. They went down into there, and immediately they were inside. The IDF then attacked those tunnels with 160 aircraft, which dropped JDAM bunker buster bombs and destroyed large parts of the tunnels. And then when some of the terrorists came out, they then got hit as well from the air. So it was I think, as you said, a strategic victory, really, for Israel, which will probably prove to be a turning point in this conflict and really hit Hamas with an absolute body blow.
Caleb.
If you listen to some people who keep saying that the response from Israel is not proportionate, they make it sound like, there are a couple of blokes in their sheds having a few beers in Palestine, just, building some rocks and missiles in their backyard and then firing them off, and they don't go anywhere. Is that the reality? Who is actually backing Palestine to be able to attack Israel like this, and is the response proportionate?
Well, the first point I make is that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are funded and equipped by Iran. They are basically an Iranian proxy, and they are carrying out this action at the behest of Iran. They obviously want to do it themselves as well, but Iran is behind it, pulling the strings. And it is Iranian-supplied missiles and material to make missiles inside Gaza that have enabled Hamas to launch this overwhelming bombardment against Israel. And the answer to the other question about proportionality, the idea, I've seen this with my own eyes many times. I've been in command posts, I've discussed with IDF commanders, I've observed on the ground the extreme care that the IDF take to target terrorist leaders, to target weapons, to target ammunition, and to target command posts, but not, if they can possibly avoid it, to hit civilians. Now, the way Hamas work, they have all of their main locations surrounded by civilians or occupied by civilians, with the deliberate intention of trying to get Israel to kill their civilians. Israel's very careful. They make phone calls to people in apartment blocks that also contain Hamas facilities, warning them to get out, telling them where to go to be safe before they bombard it. And if they don't leave, then they've developed a low-powered munition that can be dropped onto the building to give a very loud warning but doesn't destroy it to people to get out. And only then, when they're confident that the majority of civilians have gone, will they then carry out a strike. And we've seen, for example, several high-rise buildings totally destroyed by Israeli air power. I think in all those high-rise buildings, I've not heard of a single civilian casualty being reported, which is an extraordinary accomplishment. And I've said before, and I'll say again, that no other army in history has taken so much care and been so effective in preventing civilian casualties on the battlefield as the IDF. And I include in that my own British Army, the Australian Army, all of whom take immense pains to avoid killing civilians. But the Israelis have, I think, very much got the edge on this.
Amazing. Rita.
You mentioned the Iranian regime and their part in this conflict. What part has the Biden administration played, if any, in emboldening the Iranian regime? Is it a coincidence that we had a number of peace deals in the Middle East under Trump, and now 4 months into the Biden administration, and we've got a terrible conflict, the likes of which we haven't seen in many years?
Well, we haven't seen anything like this under the Trump administration. We saw several operations of this type by Hamas before, and we've seen this one after. I don't think that's coincidental. I think they knew that Trump was extremely strong in his support for Israel. They knew he was unpredictable. They didn't, I don't think, dare to launch an attack of this sort. Biden, on the other hand, has sent all the wrong signals, and I think the Biden administration's policies must take some share of the responsibility for this attack happening. Of course, responsibility is with Hamas, with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but America has a huge role to play. And if America shows any weakness, and America has strongly sided with Iran, America has essentially, under Biden, has done its utmost to abandon one of the most important US allies in the region, Saudi Arabia. US has signaled its intention to unconditionally leave Afghanistan. Now, that's not connected, but of course, people see these signals and they react accordingly. And I think Hamas has reacted as a result of that to some extent anyway.